It's Sunday, April 20, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. Our guest today is an American attorney, constitutional law professor, and congressman, serving as the U.S. representative for Maryland's 8th Congressional District. He was the lead impeachment manager for the second impeachment of Donald Trump in response to the January 6 attack on the U.S. Capitol. He was previously the ranking member on the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability, and is now the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. Representative Jamie Raskin, welcome to the Weekend Show.
I'm delighted to be with you, Anthony.
I want to start by acknowledging your service and leadership in this period of American political history. And I think I speak for many people, I'm sure, when I say thank you for being there in this moment. And with that, did you ever think that when you were getting your degrees at Harvard, that 40 years later you'd be holding the line for democracy against a Russian compromised far-right fascist regime that is deconstructing the administrative state?
No, I was not that clairvoyant graduating from college. But I will say that constitutional democracy has always been my passion. And I suppose everybody knows one thing in life, and my ticket came up and I'm in the right place to help defend our democracy and our freedom. And that's what I wake up doing every day.
And constitutional law is obviously something that in this moment is being tested, isn't it? And it does seem that there have been a couple of moments where people have gone, okay, this is a constitutional crisis, although not everybody is prepared to admit it. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that there is a desire to kind of, for some anyway, to pretend that everything is going to be fine when it seems that most of the guardrails, separation of powers, and all of the things that we rely on seem to have fallen by the wayside?
Well, it's much more comforting to think that, people want to be reassured. Hey, I want to be reassured during this time. But the language of constitutional crisis seems rather vague and abstract to me. I prefer to say there's an attack on the Constitution taking place on a daily basis by Donald Trump and his administration, and we have to defend every element of the Constitution, including due process, the right of freedom of speech, the separation of powers, Congress's lawmaking authority, Congress's power of the purse, and so on.
Are you confident that Congress has the ability to do that? Because it seems that we're now starting to rely on the courts and effectively suing Donald Trump and the administration. Do you see that as outside of the jurisdiction of Congress? That's like a kind of last-ditch attempt to save democracy is to hit him with lawsuits?
Well, this is the proper role of the courts. Like Marbury versus Madison said in 1803, it's emphatically the province and the duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. And we have an administration, really by its own accounts, that doesn't care what the law is. Donald Trump has said he doesn't care about the laws and the Constitution and would easily replace it. And so it is up to the courts to establish those constitutional boundaries to the chaos that's been unleashed on us. But I do wish that Congress were standing up for our rights within the system. James Madison said that Congress is the preeminent branch of government. We are the lawmaking branch of government. The idea that the president could just decide to adopt his own law, that we're going to set up American prisons in foreign countries, is preposterous. I mean, that would be up to Congress to decide, and I'm sure we would never decide it. It probably violates the Eighth Amendment ban on cruel and unusual punishment to locate prisoners so far away that their families and their lawyers couldn't get to them. But in any event, it's up to Congress. It's not up to the president. And the Supreme Court said in the steel seizure case in 1952, the president derives his powers only either from the Constitution explicitly or from an act of Congress giving the president the power. And Congress certainly has never given the president the power to relocate prisoners to foreign countries. And there's nothing in the Constitution that remotely vests that power in the president.
But Trump is taking this blanket immunity that the Supreme Court seems to have given him to the next level, because we're relying on him to be cognitive and to have a conscience and a soul even. And with this guy, none of that stuff is there. There is no empathy. You know, he has a level of psychosis where he really does think he's king of the world. So I suppose these laws have always relied on people being sane, so therefore that they can kind of work within those confines. This guy's really running with this immunity, isn't he?
I think you're absolutely right. It was a terrible decision. One of the most probably three wretched decisions in the history of the Republic, totally baseless and groundless. It's not based on anything in the text of the Constitution. In fact, the Constitution does give some immunities explicitly to Congress in the speech and debate clause and doesn't create anything like that for the president. In any event, they pulled a rabbit out of a hat to give the president this power. Now, the first thing is we have to understand, even as terrible as that decision is, that it's limited because it's only giving the president immunity from prosecution for felony crimes committed under the auspices of the core functions of his office. Outside of the core functions, then it's a balancing test where the court will consider all factors. And then if it's not of a public nature at all, if it's just purely out of private greed or avarice or ambition or lust or desire or whatever, the president's on his own. So even that terrible decision is not written in an unlimited way. Beyond that, it applies only to criminal prosecution. It does not apply to civil lawsuits, and it doesn't apply to anybody around him. Now, I know people say, well, it doesn't apply to anybody around him, but he could pardon someone else for engaging in crime, which he might do or he might not do. Of course, the example of the January 6th insurrectionist is instructive because if you show total blind loyalty to him, he will probably pardon you. But of course, he's turned on dozens of people who stood up for the rule of law against him. So it is an awkward situation. And I think you're right to trace a lot of the agonies of this moment to that terrible decision.
The frustration from a lot of people is that he just keeps getting away with stuff. And we almost forget all the stuff that's gone by, the espionage, the theft of the documents and potentially sharing national secrets, the insurrection, of course, January 6th, which you were intrinsically involved in. I mean, how much does it frustrate you that you watch the Capitol from the inside be attacked? We watched him on television call people to come and behave in this way, and yet he just seems that he managed to get away with that and a whole lot more.
Well, it's a profound point. It is incredibly frustrating to people. It shows really oddly one of the dangers of great wealth inequalities in a democratic society. There are some people who are so rich and so wealthy and equip themselves with armies and battalions of lawyers that they feel that the law doesn't apply to them. They can get away with anything. That's a major threat to the rule of law. The rule of law, as we understand it today, after the creation of democratic revolutions and democratic societies and constitutions, means that the rule of law applies to everybody, including our rulers, including people who get into public office. The rule of law before the American Revolution and the French Revolution existed, but essentially it was a code of conduct that rulers imposed on everybody else. And our rule of law is something that applies to everybody. It binds even the people who are in office, including people on the Supreme Court and the president and members of Congress and people in the bureaucracy and so on. But Donald Trump's attitude threatens that conception of the rule of law, that everybody is bound by it and none of us is above the law. And that's why it's so frustrating to people. I will say, he's gotten away with most everything, and that's what irritates and maddens people. But he's also been criminally convicted. I was surprised to hear him say that he would send convicted criminals to prison in foreign countries. I mean, that could have happened to him under that theory. But he's a convicted criminal. He's been an adjudicated sexual abuser. In New York, he's lost tons of civil cases, including in the infamous Trump University case where they had to, settle for millions and millions of dollars. There's lots of cases like that, but that is his MO. I mean, he routinely would not pay or underpay contractors, painters, the plumbers, you name it, and then make them sue. And then he would settle for whatever, 40 cents, 50 cents on the dollar.
And that's how he's running the country now, though. It's almost like an admission of guilt for all of those past prosecutions, because it's so clear that this is who he is. He is a kind of criminal, I won't say mastermind, but he's certainly a criminal operator. And the people he likes to hang around with are equally criminal.
He's an experienced shakedown artist. It's like what he did to President Zelensky. We've got this military aid, but before we get it to you, we have a little favor we'd like you to do for us. And that's kind of what he's been doing with these law firms. I'm about to come after you guys and ban your lawyers from federal buildings,
right,
including presumably courthouses, and ban you from federal contracts, federal employment, ban you from security clearances, or you guys give me millions of dollars worth of free legal assistance for the causes that I appoint. Absolute shakedown, to like unprecedented governmental extortion by a president against lawyers and law firms. And a lot of are standing up, and we're very proud of those who are. And then others have felt they have to buckle under and then are implicated in the extortionate scheme. Also, what they're doing is making it impossible for them to represent people on the other side of those cases. So if they take one of Donald Trump's, say, anti-consumer or anti-environment or anti-choice clients, because that's what he appoints, they're not going to be able to represent people on the other side.
What you're describing is authoritarianism. I think it's important that we keep reminding people that that's what it looks like in Russia and in Hungary and elsewhere, that people fall foul of a dictatorship in this way because of this behavior. Yeah.
I mean, we don't have a lot of experience of that in America, people who are alive today. I mean, we grew up not in an authoritarian country. It was a country that had political contradictions and huge problems and political divisions and competition, but never authoritarianism. And so this is different. But, what most Americans are more familiar with is mob movies like The Godfather, right, and so on.
Yeah.
We've got a guy who wants to act like a mob boss and use all of the resources of the taxpayers, all of our money, all of the resources of the government in order to coerce people into doing his will.
Well, he puts Al Capone on a pedestal, doesn't he? And if that's not an example of the way he sees the world, I don't know what is.
The other day, he issued another one of his remarkable single-focused executive orders at a former employee of his from the first administration named Chris Krebs, who was the top elections official at his cybersecurity unit. And he was the one who said, this election is the safest election there's ever been in American history in 2020. And he debunked all of Trump's mad allegations of election fraud and election corruption. So Trump issued this executive order against him, and then he stated in sort of an impromptu commentary, yeah, a real wise guy. In other words, he talked back to me, so I'm going to get him. I mean, that is the talk of a mob boss.
It's almost like a movie, like we're living in a film, and it would be nice for the kind of credits to roll and for this chapter to be over. But it doesn't seem to be like that. Like every day, I don't know about you, but I dread looking at my phone and seeing, what we're dealing with today. Every day is a scandal that in any other country would bring down an entire government. And yet he just seems to keep going.
The newspapers are under attack. The TV networks are under attack. You're not allowed to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Mexico. If you do, you'll be banned from certain events at the White House. The universities and the colleges are under attack. The courts are under attack. They want to impeach any judge who stands up to Donald Trump. And I've got to say, our independent judiciary is acting in heroic fashion. There are now more than 65 temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions that have been issued against this reign of lawlessness and terror in the country. And so we are depending on the judiciary like never before to maintain the structure of our Constitution. But everything is under attack. And so everybody's got to stay strong. Everybody has got to be as brave as you can be through this period.
We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk to you about immigration and specifically the individuals that have now become part of the modern vernacular. We're starting to get to know who these people are who have been wrongfully deported. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. 420 is around the corner, and there's no better time to elevate your wellness routine, whether you want to relax, recharge, or refocus. Via has the perfect lineup for you. If you haven't tried them yet, you're seriously missing out. Whether you need to unwind, refocus, or boost your mood, Via is here to enhance your everyday and night. Trusted by over 500,000 happy customers, Via is changing the game in natural wellness, blending powerful, high-quality hemp-derived ingredients to deliver real, effect-driven benefits. Whether you're looking to sleep better, have a better libido, improve focus, or simply relax, Via has a tailored solution just for you. And the best part, Via legally ships across the USA. Discreet, direct to your door, no medical card required, and backed by a worry-free guarantee. Not sure where to start? Take Via's Product Finder quiz. Get personalized recommendations tailored to your needs. It takes less than 60 seconds to complete. So, if you're 21 plus, treat yourself to Via's annual Spring 420 sale, Black Friday level savings of up to 35% site-wide right now, and up to 50% off packs and bundles. And get a free gift and more savings with your first order using our exclusive code WEEKEND. Find the link in the description below and enjoy free shipping on orders over $100. That's code WEEKEND. The link is in the description. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Scripts, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. And we're back with Representative Jamie Raskin on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. A federal judge has temporarily blocked deportations of immigrants in Colorado who face possible removal under Trump's invocation of this 18th century law, the 1798 Alien Enemies Act. Just a handful of migrants deported to this mega prison in El Salvador have a criminal record. Migrants deported without due process. And the names we're actually starting to talk about, very familiarly. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, for example, the big story surrounding Mahmoud Khalil and Rumeysa Ozturk, who was kidnapped off the streets, as many of these people are. How do you feel when you see this very kind of dramatic, masked men, plainclothes, putting people into plane vehicles, effectively disappearing people off the streets who are lawfully entitled to be here and are not criminals? How do you feel when you see that? And how do we manage this going forward?
Well, as we were saying before, there are elements of different historical episodes, and there are even elements of different kinds of movies that play in here. And I don't think that what we're seeing now is an exact replica of anything, whether it's Pinochet's Chile or Orban's Hungary or Putin's Russia or Orwell's 1984 or, The Handmaid's Tale. But it's its own thing, but it does evoke very serious resonances from authoritarian disappearances in fasciste countries like Argentina during the Dirty War or Chile under Pinochet, where people are just swept off the streets and disappeared and deported. And, what's different here is we've got a resilient, independent judiciary, and we've got a public that is increasingly emboldened to speak out. And I can't tell you what a boost it was to the Democratic Party and people in Congress, as well as the country generally, to have millions of people last Saturday marching and rallying all over the country against this authoritarianism. Very, very big deal.
Let's talk about the law effectively, or certainly their argument for ignoring the Supreme Court order that said that they should facilitate the return of Kilmar, for example. Their interpretation of the word facilitate has been very interesting, to say the least. And you posted on Blue Sky that, clearly they can't read. Just tell us, how far they have gone in this moment to reinterpret the Supreme Court's ruling and the lower court's ruling on the return of this young man.
I mean, it's essentially a fascist approach to the rule of law. I mean, they lost at the district court level. They lost at the circuit court level. They lost 9-0 in the Supreme Court. The court emphasized the fundamental importance of due process and said facilitate the return of these people to the country. So now they obsess over the word facilitate. Is that something less than guarantee or mandate or ensure and so on? And any commonsensical reading of what the Supreme Court said is obvious that the court is telling us, bring him home, facilitate his return to the country. And by the way, this is a contractual arrangement between the United States and El Salvador. They've got some kind of agreement. Now, they haven't given us the text of it yet, but there's an agreement where we're paying them $6 million, and then they're taking these, I don't even know what you call them, these human beings, these people that we're sending them, these deportees. Well, if that's the case, they're our agent. We are in a contract with them. And so the idea that we can't get someone back that we've sent them erroneously by the administration's own admission is preposterous.
And, having the El Salvadorian president in the Oval Office, there was a perfect opportunity to do the right thing and to do a kind of public pronouncement to say we made a mistake and Kilmar will be returned. But we had totally the opposite of that. We had effectively two dictators cozying up to each other, egging each other on to be more authoritarian than the other. And we even heard Trump on a hot mic say, it's the homegrowns next, which he's referring to U.S. citizens that he feels deserve to be in an El Salvadorian gulag. I mean, this is not the stuff to joke about. This is very deadly serious, isn't it?
I mean, it looked like a meeting of a bunch of Batman villains to me, chortling about how they're taking over Gotham City, rather than leaders of democracies. And, it made it very clear how they are deliberately defying the orders of the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court, which Donald Trump bragged of packing and stacking and gerrymandering to his liking so he could overturn Roe versus Wade. And that, of course, happened in the Dobbs decision. But even that Supreme Court so tilted in a Trumpian direction that they invented a completely new doctrine out of whole cloth to create presidential immunity from prosecution for felony crimes committed under the auspices of the office. Even that court told him, you've got to honor due process. We don't have the rule of law without due process because anybody could be swept up in the same situation Mr. Abrero Garcia was swept up in and deported. And if you say, well, wait a second, I'm a law-abiding citizen, I'm an Eagle Scout, they say, we're taking you somewhere else. You can't tell it to the judge because we're not bringing you to a judge. And so that is authoritarianism.
How much of what they're doing is theatrical, as in to put the fear of God into people? Because this is the playbook of the fascist leader, isn't it? Is to try and set an example with certain individuals so that people do live in fear. Do you think that we, need to be conscious of that play that he's doing?
Yeah, but I think that just makes it worse. In other words, they are truly trying to arrogate to themselves this power to sweep people off of the street and to send them to foreign countries without due process. They are completely thumbing their nose at the Constitution. The fact that they're totally aware of the spectacular theatrical cinematic television effect just makes it worse. I mean, obviously, Donald Trump, he is a man of television. He's certainly not a man of books. He knows what effect it will have, and that's what they're looking for. That's why they wasted millions and millions of dollars originally, sending people off to Guantanamo Bay, in those ridiculous air flights with like 3 or 4 people. So it's all a made-for-TV movie from his perspective.
With Kristi Noem in the cosplay and the guns, and again, it's almost as if they're all such unserious people, but their actions are extremely serious.
Well, I mean, Kristi Noem's a good example because let's say that she went to do her photo opportunity, which was grisly enough in front of all the prisoners behind bars. What if she had been taken into the prison? What if there'd been some kind of administrative error there?
Right.
That would Donald Trump be taking the position we couldn't get her back? Would the president of El Salvador be saying there's nothing we can do? It demonstrates what a fraud this is, that they're claiming that they're powerless to do anything.
Let's talk about the justification for the removal of certain individuals, and Mahmoud Khalil is an example, who was involved in a protest at a university, pro-Palestinian, not pro-Hamas. That's how they've positioned this. And they're using anti-Semitism as an excuse to go after people. And I think, certainly there are people in Jewish communities who are fearing scapegoating as Trump is invoking anti-Semitism to justify these crackdowns. But as I see it, Trump is as much an anti-Semite as anybody. I mean, he pretends to be a supporter of the Jewish people, maybe so he can cozy up to Benjamin Netanyahu over the war in Gaza because he's so anti the Palestinians there. But when it comes to the US, do you feel that there is this kind of false narrative about anti-Semitism?
Well, let's start with just the legalities of that case. It seems very clear that in the case from Columbia, as with the case from Tufts, that there are people who are here lawfully on student visas, although I believe Khalil might be a permanent resident.
Yes, he is.
Double check my math on that. But these are people who are lawfully present in the country. They're being deported for no reason other than they wrote an op-ed taking a position on one side or another of the Gaza war, or they attended a demonstration. But these are people who were never charged criminally with anything. Violent assault. I mean, under the First Amendment, we think of the dividing line is between speech and expression, no matter how much this or that party disagrees with it, and violence. And none of those people was ever charged with violent destruction of anything. I believe, I might be confusing my cases, but at least one of the people facing deportation is a nonviolent activist who views himself in the tradition of Dr. King, and cites King and Gandhi and so on. But in any event, none of these people have been charged with violence. They're just being charged essentially with political incorrectness, that they are somehow at odds with the position taken by Donald Trump. Now, it's cheering to see that you've got Jewish student groups at Columbia, and some of the members say they agree with Khalil about what his position on the Gaza war. Many were saying they disagreed with his position on the Gaza war. They say that's wholly irrelevant. He was just engaged in freedom of expression. And in fact, he was one person who constantly denounced violence and rejected violence and intimidation and threats and spent a lot of time trying to bring people together to actually talk about the convoluted and impacted politics on campus around the Middle East. He was trying to disentangle it all. And so Jewish students are standing up for these people, saying, don't violate their rights. Don't violate their free speech rights. Don't violate their rights under the Immigration Naturalization Act, their rights on their visas. Don't violate their rights in our name, is what they're saying. And I find that impressive and another example of courage, just like Harvard University standing up this week saying, sorry, we're not going to allow the federal government to take over our university. And as a graduate of that school, I felt very proud of Harvard doing that, understanding what all the risks are.
But it requires all the universities to take the same position, as it should have done with the press in the White House press briefing room when they kicked out the Associated Press. I mean, everybody's scattered. There was no connection between any of the media in that moment, which would have been the right thing to do.
And as with the law firms as well. I mean, You would think of all these institutions we're talking about, the law firms would understand the fundamental primacy and importance of everybody standing together on behalf of the rule of law and not scurrying off to make a deal, no matter how afraid you are. But the law firms that hung tough have, of course, gotten court orders telling the president of the United States he does not have the power to ban people from federal buildings or courthouses or security clearances because he doesn't like someone who used to work with them or he doesn't like a position they've taken. No, that is not within the powers of the president, and it violates the civil rights and civil liberties of citizens who are lawyers.
Is it that Trump doesn't know the boundaries and the jurisdiction that he has, or he is purposely flouting it, or is it that he is surrounded by sycophants who, as opposed to the last administration that he ran, who told him no back then, he's surrounded by yes people? How much of it do you think is him chancing it, or just being completely naive to his role?
There you're asking me a question about psychology.
It is. It's a mental health question.
I am no expert there, but and Donald Trump has been likened to a lot of different people in history, from Mussolini on the political side to Herbert Hoover on the economic side. I will tell you who he most reminds me of. When I was growing up, we had a comic book. I think it was in the Archie family of comic books called Richie Rich. And it was about a little boy who was super rich from a very wealthy family, and he felt he could get away with anything, any kind of mischief or malice. But in the end, common sense and people's compassion prevailed over this little Richie Rich character. And I think he's never grown up, out of that sense of absolute invincibility and untouchability because of his great wealth. And, the framers of our country were afraid of great disparities of fortune. Certainly Tom Paine was, because he understood that would give people this sense of, divine or superhuman powers over everybody else. And, one person, one vote under equal protection is the model for American democracy. We all have one vote. We all have one voice. And no, the fact that you have $1 billion or $50 billion does not entitle you to different treatment under the law.
And historically, dictatorships always fall, which I suppose is good news. We just have to get to that point. And this week, it was announced that a court order meant that the press room had to invite the AP and Reuters back into the room, not on a kind of rotation, but actually they're allowed to be there now, which I suppose is a sign that they are following the law in some ways when there is enough pushback.
I think that's right. It's going to be a game of cat and mouse with these people because, Trump, if you look at him historically, and he's had literally thousands of cases, civil and criminal cases, about half as a plaintiff where he's suing people from his casinos, or business partners, what have you, or, ABC or CBS, and half where he's being sued by painters and plumbers and small business contractors, former mistresses, women who allege he sexually abused or raped them, and so on. So, he's been to court a lot. We have to assert simply that there are certain standards of conduct in society. We will hold people to the law, but I would hope that leaders in America actually could be held to even a slightly higher standard than just not committing crimes against people, but actually trying to use the government as an instrument for good for everybody. That's what we have to try to get back to.
Let's take another quick break, but I want to come back and talk to you finally about tariffs and the trade war with China and the rest of the world, it seems. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. Do you ever think about how much of your life you actually spend sleeping? It's about a third. That's a lot of time to be laying on something that could be full of toxins or worse, heating you up at night. That's why I switched to an avocado mattress. They're made with certified organic latex, wool and cotton, no chemicals, no weird off-gassing, just clean, cool, naturally breathable comfort. And honestly, it feels like luxury without the guilt. My personal favorite, the Avocado Green Mattress. It's their bestseller for a reason. Super comfy, supportive, and I wake up actually feeling rested. Plus, I know it's sustainably made, ethically sourced, and built to last. Avocado is mission-driven sustainability at its best. Better for you, better for the planet. And right now, you can shop at avocadomattress.com and save up to 10% on certified organic mattresses. Dream of better with Avocado. We're back on The Weekend Show with Representative Jamie Raskin. I'm Anthony Davis. Trump's significant policy changes, including on tariffs, are unlike anything seen in modern history, putting the Federal Reserve in uncharted waters. That was what Jerome Powell, the chair, said on Wednesday. He said the level of the tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the lingering uncertainty around tariffs could inflict lasting economic damage. As a result of that announcement that he made, the markets crashed again. Representative Raskin, this is a unprecedented moment, isn't it, where Donald Trump seems to have a random number generator machine and just keeps pressing it. If anybody annoys him, he just ramps the number up. I think China's up to 145% tariff, and if you include the 100% tariff from before, that's now 245%. No one can really make sense of this, let alone the markets.
Well, Congress, under Article 1 of the Constitution, has the power to regulate commerce domestically and with foreign nations. So we seem to have completely overlooked the fact that tariffs are something that have traditionally been imposed, if imposed, by the Congress of the United States under our lawmaking power. Some have made sense and some have been off base and counterproductive and helped to lead to the Great Depression with Herbert Hoover. But in any event, it's been the product of lawmaking power and debate and dialogue. This is the first time, to my awareness, that a president has ever just decided to impose a whole spectrum of tariffs on the entire world, except for Putin's Russia, of course, and plunged the country into a trade war for no apparent reason at all. And so in addition to being utterly deranged and counterproductive and a terrible self-inflicted wound, I think it was completely lawless at the same time. He cited the IEAP and asserted that there was an emergency, but in announcing it, they said this has been going on for decades. It's been going on way too long, and we're going to impose these. That doesn't sound like much of an emergency to me if it's been going on for decades. The statute called for extraordinary and unusual circumstances. What was extraordinary? What was unusual? In fact, we ended up not with any kind of customized selective tariffs against particular protectionist laws in other countries, but just these broad brush tariffs against everybody, this 10% tariff against the whole world. So completely irrational. If Congress had done it, I suppose it would have passed some kind of constitutional scrutiny, but the president doing it on his own when he doesn't have the authority to do that, because remember, he only has the authority that we grant him or that the Constitution does. And there's nothing in the Constitution about it. And we certainly didn't grant him the power to do what he just did.
They're using tariffs now as leverage to have other countries change their politics even. And to the extent that where I'm from in the UK, the Prime Minister there, Keir Starmer, has been told the UK must repeal hate speech laws to protect LGBTQ plus people or lose Trump's trade deal. Because, of course, we have, hate speech laws that prevent people from being abusive freely. I doubt very much that the UK would go for that, but this is trying to encroach on the politics of other nations. This goes beyond trade and tariffs, doesn't it?
Well, it's not what Adam Smith and David Ricardo had in mind with free trade as part of liberal democracies and representative governments that would respect each other. But tariffs were always about how we're being treated and how we're treating others in the economic relationship. But of course, with Donald Trump, everything is a club for him to get his political way. Look, we saw J.D. Vance and we saw Elon Musk go over to Europe and embrace extreme right parties. I mean, much to the shock of the mainstream conservative and more progressive parties in Germany, J.D. Vance basically validated an extreme right party for the first time since World War II. And so, yeah, they would probably use tariffs also to help those extreme right parties gain more of a foothold throughout Europe.
That was at the Munich Security Conference, wasn't it, where we actually saw European leaders with their heads in their hands, and one man started crying at the podium and had to leave. I mean, this has a visceral reaction for Europeans because of the historical trauma that maybe Americans don't quite feel. I mean, that is the very real threat of fascism. And for J.D. Vance to say those things, and Pete Hegseth the day before saying similar things at the UN meeting, it's changed Europe overnight in terms of their military and now their trade responsibilities. I
mean, it's scandalous that America is switching sides from Ukraine over to Putin's Russia, and we're essentially switching sides under Donald Trump away from NATO towards Putin and towards the autocratic regimes of the world. And those are the ones that Donald Trump obviously feels the most affinity towards. It's the ones that Steve Bannon wants to turn into like a league of autocracies from around the world. They absolutely lionize Orban in Hungary, who's the champion of illiberal democracy, which basically means elections without freedom and elections without rights. And that's, of course, manipulated elections because they take over the government, as we're seeing happening in real time here in America. They purge anybody that they don't feel they can completely control, and then they use the government as an instrument for political self-perpetuation.
And that begs the question, because, people obviously are worried about the cost of goods, the cost of living, and the cost of eggs, which is how that election kind of played out. But it's also the 401k, isn't it? I mean, the markets do have an effect on people's retirement funds and people's quality of life. And that is really what's at stake for the average American.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, Donald Trump has already decided, he's going to be a union buster. He's an enemy of organized working class power and poor people. They're going to cut hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicaid, which tens of millions of Americans depend on in order just to survive. But the question is, are they also going to sell out the rest of the middle class too? Elon Musk calls Social Security the greatest Ponzi scheme of all time. And Trump ran on getting down the price of eggs. He doesn't care about the price of eggs or anything else. He certainly doesn't care about the price of eggs Benedict, because he's betraying the country in every conceivable way. So I think that they're going to end up painted into a corner as a tiny minority of the public. And then their last card to play before the 2026 elections will be an attack on people's voting rights and an attempt to make it nearly impossible for people to vote.
We're already seeing that with the SAVE Act and also that executive order that he kind of pushed through, which is effectively voter suppression, as you describe. How serious is this? Like, how much are you thinking about the fact that what authoritarian governments invariably do, as we see in Russia, is that they have these faux elections? And strangely, Vladimir Putin keeps winning and has done for 24 years. I mean, is that a genuine concern for you?
I think there are a lot of people who want to follow the Orban model in the Trump administration. They would not try to formally ban other political parties, but they will try to purge them from government and punish them in different ways, and then make it extremely difficult for people to vote. The SAVE Act, as you mentioned, is an extraordinary piece of legislation. It claims to be addressing the problem of illegal aliens voting, which is, of course, not a problem because it doesn't exist. It just doesn't happen. Yeah. And yet what they want to do is to require everybody to go to the polls now. You know, in the past, I've just gone to the polls and I've given them my name. They write it down and then I'm in. That's how it works in most of America. Okay. But now they want me to have to show up with my birth certificate, my driver's license, or my passport. And if they don't match, as is the case for 80% of married women whose birth name no longer matches their married name, then the marriage certificate must be presented. And all of this can be challenged by a watchful Republican poll aide who's going to try to challenge you, and you're going to have to go and defend it. They're imposing the kinds of obstacles that racist regimes in the past in American history have imposed to keep people from voting. I'm talking about grandfather clauses, literacy tests, poll taxes. You know, nothing is more characteristic of American political life than we believe everybody's got the right to vote, and at the same time, somebody out there trying to keep huge numbers of people from voting. And we're moving right back into that situation right now.
Talk to me about your colleagues in Congress on the other side of the aisle, because these are the people that could actually prevent all this stuff from happening if they had the will, right? They are falling in line with the Trump regime. And we haven't really, I mean, Rand Paul made a speech a few days ago that was like, oh, I finally agree with Rand Paul about something. But everybody else is kind of going quietly. Is there any kind of backroom talk about any kind of pushback or uprising to deal with this threat, which is ultimately, I mean, it's going to ruin the country for everybody, not just for Democrats? Yeah.
Well, Rand Paul calls himself a libertarian and shows a lot of libertarian leanings. He understands how fundamental due process is to having a liberal democratic society as opposed to a right-wing authoritarian society. So good for him for speaking out this past week. As you know, the GOP has purged most of the people who are willing to stand up as constitutional patriots for doctrines like due process, equal protection, and freedom of speech. Liz Cheney, of course, is gone. Adam Kinzinger is gone. Mitt Romney is gone. So it's pretty slim pickings over there. On the other hand, we have an extremely narrow margin in the House, so we don't need that many. We had a couple of Republican defections who joined us on some votes on the nationwide injunctions last week. So that was good. And we're working on different people. I mean, I would hope that some of them have sufficiently long-term vision to know that Donald Trump and Elon Musk are wreaking perhaps irreversible damage on significant parts of our constitutional system.
Because it affects them too, especially if they have share portfolios, that they're also getting poorer. And it seems those are the ones that might be speaking up. I mean, is it as simple as that? Because for me, a lot of this boils down to racism. You know, it's something that we don't really talk about in such a blanket way. But as far as I see it, so many of the doors leads to a kind of racist view of America and wanting to make America white again. And that's why so many of these policies are in place, both at the ballot box, but also, you know, generally regarding our human rights.
Yeah. And that's the dimension of the current moment that corresponds to the end of Reconstruction in the 19th century when there were tremendous gains made in terms of Black voting rights, Black political empowerment, the ability of African Americans to get jobs and to be integrated, even in a modest way, in the institutions of social and political life. And it provoked this huge backlash. And now we see, under the guise of the anti-DEI campaign, just huge numbers of African Americans and other racial and ethnic minorities and women and disabled people just being sacked and fired. I was coming out of the joint session State of the Union address, and Speaker Johnson's chief of staff got into his car and drove at 38 miles per hour and plowed into the back of a police vehicle and staggered out, and the police found him, and he was determined to have been drunk. And that was when I realized that they've replaced DEI hires with DUI hires. And you see that with Secretary Hegseth and a lot of other people who can actually be promoted to the highest levels of this government with the most irresponsible personal behavior, but they all happen to be white guys, so they pass the test of not being DEI.
It's very dangerous having people so inexperienced, so irresponsible in every senior cabinet position. It's not just a couple here and there. Oh, well, at least you've got Rex Tillerson, or it's not like that anymore, is it? I mean, the whole thing is a clown show, and that is going to have a real negative effect on the country, because we're only 100 odd days in, and this much has gone wrong or happened. It's only going to ramp up. I mean, he's not going to chill out over the next few months.
Well, I mean, that's a rather chilling observation, but I think it's accurate. I mean, in the old days, you used to be able to think in a Republican administration, well, at least we can depend on the Secretary of Health and Human Services. That's going to be a sensible, compassionate person. Yeah. And now you've got Robert F. Kennedy. I mean, we get massive outbreaks of measles taking place in Texas and the avian flu. And I mean, we could be dealing with the bubonic plague before this thing is over.
Just finally, I always like to end on a kind of optimistic note if possible. And I know it's difficult considering the current political landscape, but just looking across it right now, and we've seen this kind of tour with Bernie and AOC. We've seen those protests that you described. What gives you hope in this moment that the people are responding to this regime?
But when I was growing up, my dad used to say to us, when everything looks hopeless, you are the hope. So I grew up with that sense of guilt, Anthony. But I am finding millions and millions of people out there who regard themselves as the hope, and they understand that they've got intellectual resources, social, cultural, financial, emotional resources that other people maybe don't have. And they can help other people who are in an even more desperate situation, as a lot of immigrants are now, and some of the college students are now, and a lot of the federal workers whose jobs and livelihoods are on the line, and all the people that those federal workers serve. But I look to hope, to the past, because prior generations of American democratic patriots have stood up against the Alien and Sedition Acts, like at the end of the 18th century. They stood up against slave masters and slavery and the violence of the Confederacy, and they stood up for civil rights against Jim Crow and racist sheriffs, and stood up for women's rights. And, the founders of the law school where I used to teach, American University's Washington College of Law, they chained themselves to the White House. Emma Gillette and Ellen Spencer Mussey fighting for the 19th Amendment. And so, we are a product, we are the heirs to these civilizing movements that have transformed America. Obviously, from what we're seeing today, we're not an exceptional country because we're somehow immune to fascism or racism or authoritarianism. We're an exceptional country because we have sufficient democratic space and will to always defeat the fascists and defeat the racists and the Jim Crow bosses and so on. And so that's the process that is continuing today. And I'm deriving a lot of hope from Indivisible and Move On and Do the Most Good and all of the great groups out there that are fighting every single day for our democracy and freedom. And finally, I'm getting hope from the young people. And my whole campaign has turned into a project for young people called Democracy Summer. And they come and they learn about these movements that have transformed American life. And then they understand what their role is today in fighting for everybody's right to vote and statehood for people in Washington and Puerto Rico. And they see the fact that democracy is always an unfinished project. It's not just a static collection of laws. It's a process in motion, and they're part of that process. And the young people are stepping up and fighting. But we know that there's a political war for the soul of young America. And so I'm proud that I'm going to be engaged in that process with a bunch of my colleagues, including Andy Kim over on the Senate side this summer, as we get more than 1,000 young people across the country working for democracy and freedom.
Thank you for that, because I think that's what we needed to hear. For now, Representative Jamie Raskin, thank you for joining The Weekend Show.
The pleasure was all mine.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll be back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.